Here's something that should terrify you. Your generation has more access to entertainment, education, connection, and information than any human beings who have ever lived. You can learn quantum physics at 3 in the morning. You can video call someone on the other side of the planet while eating cereal. You have, quite literally, a world full of content at your fingertips every single second of every single day. And yet, and this is the part nobody wants to say out loud, you feel absolutely nothing. 42% of Gen Z reports being the loneliest generation ever measured. Not boomers who lived through actual isolation. Not millennials who survived a financial collapse. Gen Z, the generation swimming in content. The generation drowning in connection. So what went wrong? How did the most connected generation in human history end up feeling so profoundly, bone-deep empty? Stay with me. Because what we're about to unpack isn't just a social media problem. It's a philosophical crisis 2,000 years in the making, and the algorithm you're watching this on is part of it. Let's start with what's actually happening on the ground, because the numbers paint a picture that's hard to ignore. Gen Z, broadly anyone born between 1997 and 2012, has entered 2026 in what researchers are calling a checked-out state. And I don't mean checked out like distracted. I mean checked out like emotionally withdrawn from the systems that are supposed to give life structure and meaning. Start with the economic reality, because it shapes everything. Unemployment for 20 to 24-year-olds has climbed by over 2% in recent years. 79% of Gen Z shoppers now say they only buy items when they're on sale. Not because they're thrifty by nature, but because they simply cannot afford the baseline cost of existing. There are roughly 1 million more young adults living at home with their parents compared to 5 years ago. On average, that's $1,200 less in personal spending every year. And home ownership? For most of this generation, it's not a delayed milestone, it's a fantasy. Now layer the mental health crisis on top of that economic squeeze. 32% of adolescents now report clinical-level anxiety. 1 in 10 meets the threshold for depression. And here's a stat that caught me off guard. 1 in 4 teenage boys has received an ADHD diagnosis. Whether that reflects better screening or something deeper going on with how young people's attention is being shaped, the trend line is steep and it's accelerating. But here's the thing that ties the economics and the mental health together into one big knot. Gen Z's life has become quantified. Every interaction has a metric. Likes, views, follower counts, streaks, engagement rates. When your self-worth gets routed through numbers on a screen, joy stops being something you feel and starts being something you measure. And that measurement, that constant performance for invisible audiences, is quietly replacing the internal sense of meaning that previous generations took for granted. There's a nostalgia wave sweeping through this generation right now, a longing for the early 2010s when things felt optimistic, when the internet still felt like a playground instead of a marketplace. But that nostalgia masks something deeper, a low-grade dread about the future that most Gen Zers carry but rarely name. They've become risk-averse, politically fragmented. Some are leaning into traditional aesthetics, others into countercultural identities, and what looks like self-expression is often a desperate search for something solid to hold onto in a world that feels increasingly unstable. Okay, so the external conditions are rough, but the emptiness Gen Z feels isn't just about economics or job markets. There's a mechanism, a very specific, very engineered mechanism that's hollowing people out from the inside, and it lives in your pocket. Let's talk about what infinite scroll actually does to your brain, because most people don't realize this is not an accident. When you open TikTok, Instagram Reels, or YouTube Shorts, you're entering a system designed around unpredictable rewards. You swipe, and maybe the next video is boring. Swipe again, incredible. Swipe, mediocre. Swipe, mind-blowing. That pattern, the unpredictability, is exactly what makes slot machines addictive. Your brain releases dopamine not when you find the great content, But in the anticipation of finding it, the scroll itself becomes the drug. The content is almost irrelevant. Neuroscientists describe this as turning your brain into popcorn, quick hits of excitement that pop off and leave nothing behind. You get the high of anticipation over and over, but the satisfaction never lands. It's like eating a meal where every bite tastes incredible for half a second and then vanishes before you can swallow. You're consuming constantly and starving simultaneously. And here's where it gets genuinely dangerous. 83% of mental health content on TikTok contains misleading information. Let that sink in. The platform that Gen Z increasingly turns to for understanding their own emotional struggles is wrong 5 out of 6 times. What this creates is a self-diagnosis loop. You're feeling sad after a breakup, completely normal, completely human, and the algorithm serves you a 15-second clip from someone with no credentials telling you that's actually clinical depression. And because social media rewards engagement, not accuracy, that clip gets boosted. So now you've got a label. You share it. People validate it in the comments. The algorithm notices you're engaging with mental health content and starts serving you increasingly intense material, from general sadness content to anxiety content to trauma content to videos about PTSD. Your feed becomes a funnel that takes a normal human emotion and escalates it into a medical-sounding crisis. This is what researchers call the validation trap. Likes confirm the narrative. The algorithm reinforces it, and your actual emotional experience gets buried under a pile of crowdsourced diagnoses that may have nothing to do with what you're really going through. You're not being helped. You're being monetized. And the emptiness you started with? It just got a clinical label that makes it harder to address, not easier. So we've got an economic squeeze draining hope. We've got a dopamine machine training your brain to crave without ever being satisfied. But there's a third layer to this emptiness that goes deeper than economics and deeper than neuroscience. And for this one, we need to go back about 150 years. Friedrich Nietzsche, and stick with me here, this is going somewhere, saw something coming that is astonishingly relevant to what Gen Z is experiencing right now. He talked about what he called herd morality. The idea that people would stop thinking for themselves and instead just follow whatever the crowd validated. He wasn't talking about social media followers, obviously, but the mechanism he described, it maps almost perfectly onto the like button. When your sense of right and wrong, your sense of what matters, comes from what gets engagement, you've outsourced your values to an algorithm. And Nietzsche would say that's not just sad, that's a form of spiritual surrender. Then there's Jean-Paul Sartre, who dropped one of the most important phrases in the history of philosophy. Existence precedes essence, meaning you're not born with a purpose. There is no script. You have to build meaning yourself through the choices you make. Now for Sartre, this was supposed to be liberating. You get to decide who you are. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. What happens when the space where you're supposed to build that meaning gets colonized by an algorithm? Think about it. The place where Gen Z spends the most time, social media, is a performance space. You're not living. You're producing content about living. You're not figuring out your identity. You're curating an identity for likes. Life becomes a content farm, and the absurdity of that, creating meaning for an algorithm that doesn't care about you, is genuinely suffocating. This is where Albert Camus becomes essential. Camus said the universe has no inherent meaning. It doesn't care about you, and the temptation is to either deny that reality or collapse under it, to become a nihilist, to say nothing matters and give up. But Camus said that there's a third option. He called it rebellion. Not political rebellion, but existential rebellion. You accept that the universe is absurd. You accept that the algorithm doesn't care. And then you create meaning anyway, not because some app tells you to, but because the act of creation itself is the point. And I think this is actually where Gen Z has more power than they realize. This generation isn't naive. They know the system is rigged. They know the dopamine trap is real. They know the economy isn't working for them. But the existentialist answer isn't to scroll harder or opt out entirely. It's to build something real in the middle of the absurdity, to reject the idea that your worth is measured in metrics, to create purpose that lives offline. That doesn't need validation. That belongs to you. I want to pause the philosophy for a minute and just talk about what this actually looks like in real life, because these aren't abstractions. These are real people. There's a post that went around online, and I'm paraphrasing here, from a 25-year-old who said, "I grew up on metrics. Every part of my childhood was ranked, rated, scored. Grades, standardized tests, follower counts, engagement. And now I'm an adult, and I have no idea who I am without a number attached. I consume content all day, podcasts, videos, articles, and at the end of the day, I feel like I've eaten a 10-course meal made entirely of air. My brain is full. My soul is empty." That word, empty, keeps coming up. Not angry, not depressed necessarily. Empty, like the container is there, but the substance has been siphoned out. Another person described deleting TikTok after realizing that the mental health content on the platform was actually making their anxiety worse, not better. They said, and this hit me, that they'd been using 15-second therapy clips as a substitute for actual self-reflection. And when they stopped scrolling and started journaling, started reading actual books, the world didn't get easier, but it started to feel real again. They could feel their own feelings instead of performing someone else's. And then there's the 3 a.m. doom scroll. You know the one. You're not even looking at the content anymore. Your thumb is moving on autopilot. Your eyes are glazed. The room is dark. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice is asking, what am I even doing? That moment, that 3 a.m. moment, is the existential crisis in miniature. It's the point where the dopamine trap meets the meaning void, and you can feel, physically feel, that something essential is missing. 58% of Gen Z says they haven't felt a sense of meaning or purpose recently. Not 58% of people in a war zone. Not people in extreme poverty. Young people in some of the wealthiest countries on Earth, with every resource available, saying they can't find a reason to care. That's not laziness. That's a system-level failure in how we've structured modern life. All right, so here's where we turn this around, because I refuse to leave you in the void. The philosophers didn't leave us in the void either. They all offered a way forward, and it starts with something counterintuitively simple. Step 1. Create friction with the dopamine machine. I'm not telling you to throw your phone in a river. I'm saying carve out 1 hour a day, just one, where you are unreachable. No notifications, no feeds, no content, just you and whatever is actually in front of you. This sounds small, but the reason it matters is that the infinite scroll works by eliminating all friction between you and the next dopamine hit. When you reintroduce friction, you give your brain space to remember what its own thoughts sound like. Step 2. Journal your purpose. And I don't mean in some woo-woo. Write your manifestation way. I mean, sit down and answer one question honestly. What would I do if nobody could see it? No posts, no stories, no metrics. What would you build, create, explore, or pursue if likes didn't exist? That question, Sartre would love this, is the beginning of authentic identity. It's the moment where you stop performing existence and start actually living it. Step 3. Build real-world hobbies that have no audience. Cook a meal you'll never photograph. Go for a walk with no podcast in your ears. Read a physical book. Have a conversation where neither of you is waiting to turn the other person into a tweet. The emptiness Gen Z feels isn't caused by a lack of stimulation. It's caused by an absence of presence. You're everywhere at once and nowhere in particular. Real hobbies, the kind that don't generate content, anchor you in the physical world where meaning actually lives. And step 4, and this is the existential action plan, is to accept the absurdity without letting it paralyze you. Camus said, imagine Sisyphus happy, the guy pushing a boulder up a hill for eternity, and finding meaning in the push, not the summit. Your boulder is living in a world designed to turn your attention into someone else's profit. You're not going to fix that system overnight, but you can choose every single day to do something that matters to you for no reason other than it matters to you. That's rebellion. That's freedom. And it's available right now. Gen Z isn't broken. You're not empty because something's wrong with you. You're empty because you're living inside a machine that was engineered to keep you hungry and never let you eat. But the exit exists. The philosophers found it centuries ago, and you can find it too. One real hour, one honest question, one unphotographed moment at a time. If this hits somewhere real, drop a like. If you know someone drowning in the scroll, send this to them. And if you want more conversations about finding meaning in a world that profits from your emptiness, subscribe. We're just getting started.